There are two types of loops in Python: while loops and for loops. The objective of this lesson is to learn about while loops in Python. What is a while loop? Imagine a person who likes cookies so much that if given a jar, she or he eats all the cookies one at a time. This person is basically in a while loop. This means that as long as a condition is true, in this case, of course, the condition is if there are any cookie left in the jar, then the loop continues. Let's see what is the algorithm for this while loop. Step 1 of the algorithm is, of course, to count the number of cookies in the jar. In step 2, you ask the question, are there any cookie left in the jar? And if the number is greater than 0, then go to step 3 to take a cookie out of the jar. Next, eat it. And in the next step, go back to step 2 and ask the question again. And as long as there are cookies left in the jar, this loop continues. Notice that in step 2, if the condition in front of the while loop is false, then none of the statements 3 or 4 or 5 will be evaluated, and program automatically jumps out of the while loop and goes to step 6. And of course, if there are any steps after 6, it will continue with those steps. So again, the only steps which are included in the while are 2, 3, 4, and 5. A while loop in Python programming repeatedly executes one or more statements as long as a condition is true. Here is the format of the while loop in Python. It starts with the keyword while. In front of the keyword, you can put any expression which evaluates to either true or false. Next, put a colon after it, which is required. Next, one or more statements. Again, remember tab is required. And of course, after the while is over, you can put any statement that you want. And remember that the statement which is not tabbed, it is not part of the while loop. Also be very careful. If the statement in front of the while never becomes false, then the while loop never ends. And this is called an infinite loop, and your program continues in the while loop and never exits. Now that you know about the while statement, let me convert the cookie eating loop to a program using Python while loop. In step 1 of the program, the value of 20 is assigned to a variable. Next, a Python while statement is used to check the number of cookies. If the number of cookies is greater than 0, then we go inside the while loop. Taking a cookie out of the jar is the same as subtracting 1 from the number of cookies. Also notice that I have printed eating a cookie in place of step 4. It is very important to remember that there is no explicit goto command in a while loop. This step is automatically done by the Python interpreter. As soon as Python encounters a statement which is not tabbed, then it knows that the end of the while loop is reached, and that statement is out of the while loop. Notice that in the top I have an algorithm, and in the bottom I have a program, which is the implementation of the algorithm in Python programming language. Now let's write and run this program in Python. As usual, open the Python IDLE, go to File, and open a new text editor. And the first thing you do is save and give it a name that you remember, and save it. Let me also put the algorithm on the right side so you can see what I am doing while I'm typing the program. All I'm doing here is typing the algorithm exactly as it is shown on the right side. Now, if I run my algorithm, you see that it runs and repeats eat a cookie 20 times, and at the end, once the cookies are gone, it says I ate all the cookies. let's make the algorithm a little more interesting. Rather than fixing the number of cookies, let's ask the user how many cookies are in the jar. And as you know, the input returns a string, so I have to convert it to an integer. Now, this time when I run the algorithm, it asks me how many cookies are in the jar, and if I answer 10, it again goes through and repeats eat a cookie 10 times, and at the end it prints I ate all the cookies. What if I want to know how many cookies I have eaten at each step? All I have to do is add a variable and call it cookies eaten, and every time that I take a cookie out of a jar, also add a number to that, and at the same time let's change the printf statement so it will tell me how many cookies are eaten. Now this time if I run the program and let's say I answer that there are 5 cookies in the jar, then it tells me that eat cookie number 1, eat cookie number 2, and so on. And I know how many cookies I'm eating. Let's have a practical example. Here is an algorithm to find the square root of a number. The algorithm is given a number. To find the square root, just guess the square root of the number, any number that you want. Then square your guess and subtract it from the original number. Of course, if the difference is very small, that means you are already done. Otherwise, you have to calculate a new guess by adding the previous guess to the original divided by guess and then dividing the total by 2. And then going to step 3 to check to see if your new guess is good enough. This algorithm is known as the Babylonian algorithm. So now let me implement this in Python. Again, I'm going to open the Python IDLE, open a new text editor, and the first thing I do, I save it and give it a name. I'm going to write the program, but let me put the algorithm on the right side so you can see as I type the program. I'm going to ask the user to enter the number, then I'm going to convert it to a float point. Then let's say I decide that my first guess would be half of the number, and my accuracy is 0.01. And then I'm going to calculate the absolute difference of the number minus guess the squared, and if it is greater than accuracy, I have to recalculate my guess. And then once everything is done, I come out of loop and print the original number and the square root of the number. So let's start with a number that we know what the square root is. The number is 25 and the square root is 5.0000129, which is very accurate. Let's run the program again and try another number. This time I'm going to give him 200.6 and it finds the square root again. How about if I give the program a very large number? Even though the square root looks very strange, but it is correct. What if I want to know how many times did the program ran over the while loop? So what I have to do is to modify my program accordingly. To do so, all I have to do is add another variable called iteration, and I initialize it as 0, and every time that I go through the loop, I print which iteration it is and what is my current guess at that particular iteration. And of course, what I have to do next is also add 1 to the iteration. Now this time if I run the program and let's give it some other number such as 200, you see that it takes 5 iterations plus the initial guess to calculate the square root of the number. What if I give it a large number? So let's run the program again, and this time I'm going to give it a large number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And when I push return, it shows me the final result, and it also tells me that it took 16 iterations before it could get to the accuracy of 0.01. What if I make the accuracy even more, like I'll require the accuracy to be 0.001? Let's run the same number again and see what happens. As you can see, this time also it took 16 iterations. That basically means that the original number was accurate enough and it was within the tolerance of 0.001. So, what did you learn in this lesson? You learned how to write a while loop in Python, and you also learned that if the expression in front of the while statement never becomes false, then you have an infinite loop and your program loops endlessly and never exits.